In Matthew chapter 14, Jesus walks on water. Beginning in verse 22, it says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, 'Take courage, it's me. Don't be afraid.'" And here's where Matthew's version of the story inserts something incredibly powerful. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat. He walked on the water and he came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you start to doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped Jesus, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country, and people brought all their sick to him, and they begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Powerful story. Here's what I want us to look at today. They see Jesus walking on the water, which, what? And they think it's a ghost. And Jesus says, "Chill out, guys. It's me, Jesus." And Peter says, "If it's really you, tell me to come to you. If it's really you, let me be where you are. If it's really you, invite me into your presence." What is it about Jesus that would lead Peter to say something like that in a moment like that? Notice, Peter doesn't say, "If it's really you, prove it with a miracle. If it's really you, fly around in the sky. If it's really you, tell me everything I ever did. If it's really you, heal me. If it's really you, forgive me." Now, these are all things that Jesus has done. These are all ways that the disciples could know him based on his prior actions. These are all things that if you and I did even one of them, we'd be known for that our whole lives. Jesus has done all of these things. But I love this little addition to the story in Matthew, because apparently, aside from all of this stuff, Jesus' disciples know him for something else. Even more than his power, the one by whom and for whom and through whom all things were made in heaven and on the earth. Even more than his power, and even more than his purpose, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Even more than his purpose, apparently, Jesus is known for his posture towards you. What are you known for? What do people think of when they think of you? What are you like? What are your defining characteristics? Sometimes I get to go back to the Midwest, back to Chicago, where I'm from. And it's always a humbling thing going back home, because I want to be known for my kindness and for my love. And maybe that's true out here in Phoenix. I've tried to be consistent and faithful for the 10 years that I've been out here. But when you go home, you find out real quick what you're actually known for. And it starts with a, "Hey, you remember that one time that you..." This story, to me, it's all about God's defining characteristic, what he's known for. Now, I want to ask you, in your head, in your life, in your relationship with God, what's his most prominent trait? What's he known for to you? You know, there was a time when people in general didn't quite know what God was like and how he felt about them and what he had in store for them. for a lot of human history, God seemed like he was really far off. Sometimes he would show up and tell you to do something like build an ark or sacrifice your son or go over to this town and march around it 7 times blowing your trumpet. Sometimes he would show up and tell you to do something, but other times, maybe most times, he seemed like he was far away. You know, there's like a 400-year gap between what happened with Joseph in Egypt and God talking to Moses through the burning bush. That's generations of people who are born, lived their whole lives, and died without a word from God spoken to the earth. And when he did speak up, it seemed like God was mysterious. Like people didn't really know his will, or even if they did know his will, they didn't really understand his ways, or they misunderstood it. Remember the time that God promised Abraham that he was going to be a father? Remember that? And it didn't happen right away. So Abraham starts to look at his wife's maidservant, Hagar, and think, maybe that's what God meant? And in that story, it's not like God showed up and said, no, man, that's not how I'm going to do it. To Abraham, God's ways were still mysterious. He didn't have a clue how God was going to do what he promised to do. Sometimes, to the people that God made, God seemed fickle. When something bad happened, people would say, well, that happened because God is punishing you. And to them, it actually kind of seemed like that's the way God did things. When something good happened, people would say, well, God is rewarding you. And it kind of seemed like that's the way that God worked. Do you remember Job's friends in the midst of his tragedy? What was their counsel to their friend? You got to figure out what you did to deserve this. You got to figure out what you did to have God do this to you, right? Do you remember the blind man that Jesus comes across, and his disciples want Jesus to help them figure out who messed up, this guy or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, I'm not saying that any of this is actually how God is. My point is that when you look at the record of mankind's interactions with the God that made them, people seem like they really don't know if this is how God is or not. They're unsure. Now, this is an important point. It's not that God wanted to be mysterious. God sent messages to his people through the prophets, reminding people what he really is like and trying to clue them in on how he really does feel about them and trying to give them hope for what he really does have planned for them. And he would use like real life analogies, like whole life analogies, like Israel. God picks a dude that's worshiping the moon and animals, and this guy can't have kids. He makes this man into a family and then grows this family into a nation and takes special care of them. But he says to them and anyone else who's paying attention that this relationship that I have with Israel, this is how I feel about the whole world. This is what I want to do with the whole world. You know, there were thousands of years after that moment in the garden where people and God couldn't seem any farther apart. And entire generations of people felt clueless about who God is and what he's really like and how he really feels about the crown of his creation. People were waiting desperately for God to make all of this clear so that we could actually know him. And then he finally arrived. God himself showed up in the world. The first chapter of the Gospel according to John says, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world didn't recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own didn't receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children born not of natural descent or of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. What this is saying is, when Jesus came, people didn't have to wonder anymore what God is really like. Jesus said, when you look at me, you've seen God. What do you think of when you think of God? You know, working with young people, I'm always trying to get an idea of who God is to them. Because as adults, sometimes the image of God in our heads is the same one that we've had since 3rd grade. Jesus says we don't have to wonder what God is like. If you're struggling through something right now, and you're wondering, what in the world is God up to? How does he feel about what I'm going through? What promise can I hold on to about the character of God to get me through this tough time? I want to encourage you to take some time over the next few days. Mark out a little bit of space each morning or each evening and look through the Gospels and see what comes from Jesus and what goes away because of Jesus. Unless you're a fig tree, Jesus isn't cursing you. Everywhere he goes, he offers forgiveness and life and salvation. No spirit of fear comes from him. There's no condemnation in Christ. No temptation comes from him. He's not the author of disease or the author of confusion or the author of pain or regret or sorrow or death. None of this comes from him, and he has something to say to each one of these. He's the remedy in this life and the life to come. The Word became flesh and dwelt among them. God's promises came to life in Jesus, and the will of God for you and the favor of God for you became someone that you could look at and listen to, someone you could touch and embrace and sit at the feet of. And you and I can study his life and his words and know exactly how God does things. We can know exactly how he feels about us. We can know exactly what he has in store for us, what he's promised for us. Jesus is the visible representation of God. If we've seen him, we've seen the Father. He's the answer to every prayer lifted up to the heavens. He's the substantive embodiment of every promise God ever made to mankind. He's the fulfillment of every prophecy. He's the one that we've all been waiting for since Genesis 3:16. And how does he want to be known? What's his preferred nickname? Let's take a look at Isaiah. Isaiah 7:14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and he will be called Emmanuel. Jesus' preferred nickname is Emmanuel. That word means God is with us. This is what he's going to be known for. It doesn't say his favorite nickname is going to be king or judge or creator or all-powerful one. All of that's true. But if you know him, the thing that stands out most is his posture towards you. He's not far off. He's near you. He's not mysterious. He's clear in how he feels. He says, you can come to me. You're welcome in my presence. You can stand in my grace. Hear this. The creator of the universe wants to spend time with you. That's why Peter says, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you, because that's who you are. And Jesus says, come on then. And notice where and when this happens. In the midst of the wind and the waves. I hope that you had a good summer. For me, This time when summer wraps up and school starts again is the beginning of a season of time where I am especially aware of the pain in my life and in the lives of others. Because during the summer, we can get pretty distracted from real life. I can pretend that all my kiddos at the high school are fine when I'm looking at their Snapchats at the beach and they're going to get ice cream. But in a few days, I'm going to start having the office conversations where they open up about what's really going on. It's back to business time now. And I know for a lot of you, things are pretty rough right now. Some of you are struggling financially right now, and the fact that tuition payments are about to start again isn't helping at all. It's back to school clothes and supplies and books, and none of that's helping. Some of you are in bad health right now, and the idea that it's not going to cool down for another 2 months isn't helping right now. Some of you have tension in your marriage or your family, and the fact that we're going to blink and the holidays are going to be here, that it's going to be time to gather all of that strife and discord under one roof again, that's not helping. These coming weeks, the wind and the waves can get pretty rocky. I love the picture that this passage paints because it acknowledges that there really are problems in this life, and it shows us exactly where Jesus is in the midst of it all. He's standing right on top of them, inviting you into his presence. He says, we can go through this together. And no matter whether you stand or sink from moment to moment, whether you experience faith or doubt or any other emotion in the midst of the storm, Jesus promises that he will get you to the other side. He'll keep you with him and get you to where he's headed. So may he bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. May he look upon you with favor and give you his peace. Go in that peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.